My name is Natalie. I'm 27. And the day my daughter was born was the day I finally understood that some people can look you in the face, hear you begging, and still choose a party over your pain. I was in a hospital bed in Houston, shaking through an early labor that had started 6 weeks too soon. When I made the call, I honestly thought no father would ignore. I said I needed him there. I said the baby was coming early. I said I was scared. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that tells you the answer before the words come. Then he told me he couldn't leave because my sister's pool party was already starting. He said people were arriving. He said I was surrounded by doctors. He said it was just a baby, and this party mattered more right now. A few hours later, my little girl came into the world too small, too early, and fighting to breathe. They took her straight to the NICU before I could even hold her properly. I was still lying there alone, numb from the waist down and hollowed out from the chest up, when I saw the photo that made something in me go cold. While I was staring at monitors and signing forms I could barely read, my father was smiling by a swimming pool with a drink in his hand, like this was just another perfect summer afternoon. That should have been the moment I cut him off forever. It wasn't. Not yet. But it was the moment I stopped making excuses for him. And years later, when he came back asking to see the granddaughter he had once treated like an inconvenience, he found out I was no longer the woman he thought he could leave behind. Before I tell you what he wanted from me and why I made him regret that day for the rest of his life, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I really want to see how far this story reaches. My daughter was born at 2:47 in the afternoon on a blazing August day in Houston. After an 8-hour labor, I spent mostly trying not to panic. I had been 34 weeks pregnant and still working my shift in the ER when the first contraction hit so hard I had to grab the nurse's station to stay upright. At first, I told myself it was Braxton Hicks, or dehydration, or anything but labor. Then my water broke on the floor in front of 2 residents and a woman asking for a blanket. And suddenly there was no pretending anymore. They got me upstairs fast. Somebody put a wristband on me. Somebody else called obstetrics. I remember fluorescent lights flying over my head as they wheeled me down the hall, and I remember reaching for my phone with shaking hands because there was one call I still believed mattered. When he answered, I said, "Dad, I'm in labor. It's early. I need you here." There was a pause. Not concern, not fear. A pause like I had interrupted something inconvenient. Then he said, "Right now." I said, "Yes, right now. She's coming 6 weeks early. They think she may need the NICU. Please come." I can still hear the sigh he let out. "Cassidy's pool party is today, Natalie. People are already arriving." I closed my eyes and felt another contraction tear through me. "Dad," I said, "I'm having your granddaughter." He lowered his voice the way people do when they think they're being reasonable. "You're in a hospital. You're surrounded by doctors. Cassidy only gets one day like this." Then he said the sentence I replayed in my mind for years. "It's just a baby right now. The party matters more at this moment. You'll be fine." I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me go completely still. I didn't scream at him. I didn't beg again. I just ended the call. The nurse beside me looked at my face and asked softly if she should call someone else. I said no, because there was no one else. Derek had vanished the day I told him I was pregnant. My mother had been gone for 3 years, and the only parent I had left had just chosen sunscreen and cocktails over me and my child. My daughter came into the world tiny and furious, all 4 pounds and a few desperate cries, and for one beautiful broken second I saw her face before they rushed her away. She had a little crease between her brows like she was already unimpressed with this planet. Then the room changed. There were too many hands, too many voices, too much movement around someone so small. A doctor leaned over me and said they were taking her to the NICU because she was breathing but struggling. I kept asking if she was alive. Nobody answered the question the first time because they were busy saving her. They rolled me into recovery an hour later. No flowers, no family, no father in the waiting room, no man pacing the hallway. Just me in a bed, staring at a pale green wall, numb from the waist down and aching everywhere else. Then my phone lit up. Cassidy had texted, "Congrats, sis. Dad said the baby's okay. Sorry I couldn't make it. The party's crazy today." There was a laughing emoji at the end. Under it was a photo she had posted to her story. She was on a float in the pool, grinning into the camera with perfect makeup. Behind her, my father stood near the patio table in sunglasses, smiling with a drink in his hand, like he didn't have a daughter upstairs in a hospital bed and a granddaughter in an incubator fighting to breathe. The timestamp said 3:02, 15 minutes after my daughter was born. I turned my phone face down and finally let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of crying that feels like your body is leaking grief through every place it can. A NICU nurse came in that evening and asked if I had chosen a name yet. I swallowed hard and said, "Ren." She smiled and said it suited her. Then she asked if I wanted to be wheeled down to see my baby. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. They took me through 2 security doors into a room full of machines and fragile hope. My daughter was inside a clear plastic incubator with wires on her chest and the smallest knit cap I had ever seen. I put my hand through the opening and touched her fingers. She curled them around the tip of mine like she already knew I was all she had. I leaned close and whispered, "I'm here, baby. I'm not leaving." What I didn't know then was how expensive that promise would become. But I meant it with every part of me. And from that moment on, whether anyone showed up for us or not, I was going to keep it. Ren spent 11 days in the NICU, and every one of those days peeled away another layer of whatever illusions I still had about my family. The nurses were kind in that efficient, exhausted way only NICU nurses can be. They taught me how to feed her through a syringe when she was too tired to latch. They showed me how to slide my hand under her back without disturbing the monitors. They celebrated every ounce she gained like it was a miracle. And to me, it was. I lived in a strange loop of pumping milk, washing parts, signing forms, asking doctors the same questions in slightly different words, and staring at the rise and fall of her tiny chest until my own breathing matched hers. I was discharged before she was, which felt cruel in a way nobody warns you about. They gave me paperwork, pain medication, and instructions to rest. Rest. As if any mother could go home and rest while her child stayed behind a locked door under fluorescent lights. So I stayed as long as they would let me each day, then went home to a silent apartment I had once imagined bringing her to with balloons and photos and stupid new mom joy. Instead, I came home to an assembled crib and unopened baby gifts and a diaper bag I had packed for a normal birth. Not this. My father came on the 4th day. I know it was the 4th, because I had started measuring time by bilirubin levels, oxygen support, and whether Ren's feeding tube had been moved yet. He showed up in a polo shirt that still smelled faintly like chlorine and expensive cologne. He stopped at the doorway of the NICU bay and looked uncomfortable, as if the room itself had accused him of something. "She's really small," he said. "Is she going to be okay?" "The doctor says yes," I told him. "If she keeps improving." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "Good. Good." Then after a few seconds he said, "Cassidy wanted me to ask if you need anything from the house." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was such a perfect sentence. "Not do you need anything," Cassidy wanted me to ask. Even here, with my daughter under monitors, I was still orbiting her convenience. I said no. He took 2 cautious steps closer to the incubator, peered in like he was inspecting someone else's child, then asked whether I had filed for child support from Derek. That was the first practical question he asked me after I gave birth. Not how are you? Not did you sleep? Not do you need help? Child support. I told him I was handling it. He said good and glanced at his watch. He stayed 22 minutes. Yes, I counted. When your whole life is blowing apart, you count strange things. Minutes, ounces, text messages unanswered, days since someone asked if you were okay and actually meant it. After he left, one of the nurses brought me a cup of coffee and said, "Honey, that man is not worthy of you." I smiled because I didn't trust myself to speak. My coworkers from the ER came more often than my father did. One brought me fresh clothes. One left lasagna in my fridge. My charge nurse sat with me during her lunch break and helped me fill out leave forms because my brain felt like wet paper. On the 7th day, Dr. Fiona Webb, who had supervised me more times than I could count and never once been sentimental about anything, drove in from the suburbs just to sit beside me in the NICU and say, "You should not have to do this alone." I looked at Ren through the incubator wall and said, "I've been doing things alone for a long time." She reached over and squeezed my shoulder and said, "Then let this be the last thing you do without real support." I wanted to believe her. I did. But I had already started to understand something that would take me years to fully admit. Some families do not fail you in one dramatic moment. They train you, slowly, to expect less and less until abandonment just feels like the logical next step. Ren got stronger. Her oxygen came off. She learned to finish bottles without tiring out. On the 11th day, a nurse placed her in my arms and said, "She's ready to go home." That should have been a magical sentence. It was magical. It was also terrifying. I buckled my daughter into a car seat so small it looked fake. I carried her through the hospital lobby with one hand under her head and my bag over my shoulder. No one met us at the curb. No one took a photo. No one said, "Welcome home, Ren." The August heat hit my face as the doors slid open, and I remember thinking that the world looked offensively normal for a day that felt this huge. I put her in the back seat, got behind the wheel, and just sat there with both hands gripping the steering wheel while she made little newborn noises behind me. I was 27. My body still hurt. My bank account was thin. The father of my child was gone. My own father had made it clear where I ranked, and yet when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that tiny face, I didn't feel weak. I felt cornered. Yes, exhausted. Absolutely. But stronger than anyone had ever given me credit for. I drove home and carried her into that apartment by myself. I laid her in the crib I had built alone during my 3rd trimester. Then I stood there watching her sleep and made a decision so quietly nobody heard it but me. I was done waiting for people to turn into the family I needed. If they wanted a place in our lives, they were going to have to earn it. And if they didn't, Ren and I would build something better without them. The first year of Ren's life nearly broke me, but it also made me impossible to manipulate. There is something about waking up every 2 hours to feed a preemie, then dragging yourself to work, then coming home to do laundry with one hand while holding a baby with the other, that burns away any remaining patience for people who only show up when it costs them nothing. I went back to work too soon because I had to. Bills don't care about trauma. Rent doesn't pause because your life got hard. I switched to a brutal schedule that let me trade off childcare with a retired neighbor I paid in cash and gratitude. I learned how to nap sitting upright. I learned how to eat a protein bar over the sink while sterilizing bottles. I learned how to cry in the shower where no one could hear me, and then come out smiling because my daughter deserved a mother who felt like safety. My father called a few times in those first months. The conversations always sounded like they were happening between appointments. "How's the baby?" Fine. You back at work yet? Yes. Cassidy says preemies catch up fast, so that's good. I never once heard him say I'm sorry I wasn't there. He sent a stuffed elephant for Ren's first Christmas. The tag said, "From Grandpa and Cassidy," as if that covered anything. He did not visit. On Ren's first birthday, I bought a small cake with pale yellow frosting and put a single candle in it. She was too young to understand any of it, but she clapped when I sang to her and smeared frosting across her own cheeks like she had invented joy. I waited all day for a call that never came. Around 8 that night, Cassidy posted a carousel of photos from some rooftop brunch with the caption "birthday behavior." I stared at it for a long second before realizing she hadn't forgotten Ren's birthday. She hadn't remembered it in the first place. That was the day something shifted from pain into clarity. My father was not a misunderstood man. He was not overwhelmed. He was not bad at feelings in some harmless way. He was a man who had spent years treating me like the child who would understand, the child who would adapt, the child who needed less. And because I had survived it, he had mistaken my endurance for permission. So I stopped. I stopped sending photos. I stopped texting updates. I stopped calling on holidays. I stopped performing daughterhood for people who had never treated motherhood as sacred when it came to me. Thanksgiving came. I stayed home with Ren and made boxed stuffing, roasted chicken, and mashed potatoes while she banged a wooden spoon against the high chair tray. Christmas came. I dressed her in red pajamas and watched old movies with the sound low while she fell asleep against my chest. My father sent a message on Christmas night that said, "Hope you girls had a good one." I didn't answer. He did not follow up. That told me everything. When you disappear from someone's life and they barely notice, that is an answer. By the time Ren turned 2, our world had settled into a rhythm that was hard but peaceful. I moved us into a better apartment in Midtown, close enough to work that I could get there fast if needed, and far enough from my old life that I could breathe. I enrolled in an advanced nursing program online after Ren went to sleep. Most nights I studied with her baby monitor beside my laptop and a cold cup of coffee within reach. I was tired down to the bone, but I was building something. My father's calls got rarer. Cassidy sent one message asking if I was mad at the family. I wrote back, "No, I'm just living my life." She read it and sent a thumbs up. No one asked anything else. No one showed up at my door. No one fought for us. For a while that still hurt. Then one day it didn't. One day I realized that peace had quietly taken the place of disappointment. There was no sudden breakthrough, no speech in the mirror, no dramatic song playing in the background. Just a Thursday evening in my little kitchen while Ren colored at the table and I stirred pasta on the stove. She looked up at me and said, "Mommy, you happy?" I laughed because she sounded more certain than curious. I said, "Yeah, baby, I think I am." And I meant it. Not because life was easy, it wasn't, but because the constant ache of waiting to matter had finally begun to fade. I wasn't chasing my father's approval anymore. I wasn't trying to make Cassidy care. I wasn't explaining my hurt to people committed to misunderstanding it. I was raising my daughter in a home where nobody treated her like an inconvenience. That was the revenge I had not planned and had not yet fully named. I was creating the kind of life they had assumed I could never build without them. And the beautiful thing was, by then, I no longer needed them to see it. Ren was 3 when she started asking questions that hit harder than any insult my family had ever thrown at me. She wanted to know why the moon followed our car, why toast tasted better cut into triangles, why her shoes made her run faster if they blinked. And one Sunday afternoon, while I was brushing tangled curls out of her hair after a bath, she looked at me through the mirror and asked, "Do I got a grandpa?" It caught me so off guard I had to stop brushing. I said, "You do." She thought about that. Then she asked, "Where he at?" I swallowed and chose my words carefully because children deserve truth, but they deserve it in pieces they can carry. I said, "He lives somewhere else, baby." She nodded like that was enough and asked for a different shirt. But after she ran out of the bathroom, I stood there holding the hairbrush and staring at my own reflection, wondering how many more questions were coming and what version of the answers I could live with. Around the same time, life began opening in ways I had stopped expecting. I finished my advanced certification and moved into a charge nurse role on the maternity side of the hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had once been the terrified woman alone in one of those rooms, and now I was the voice helping other mothers breathe through fear, paperwork, pain, and the chaos of unexpected births. I was good at it because I knew what abandonment looked like from the bed. I knew how much it mattered when someone stayed. Then Marcus entered our lives in a way so gentle I almost missed how important it was at first. He was a third-grade teacher and the older brother of one of the nurses I worked with. We met at a birthday party in a park where Ren spent 20 minutes trying to convince him that ducks liked crackers more if you called them by name first. Most men either performed patience around single mothers or avoided us altogether. Marcus did neither. He just talked to Ren like she was a person and to me, like I wasn't broken. He started showing up in small ways. Pizza after a bad shift, coffee left outside my apartment before an exam, sitting on the floor helping Ren build a cardboard castle while I folded laundry. He never rushed me, never played rescuer, never treated our life like a charity project. One rainy evening, after he had read Ren the same picture book 3 times in a row because she kept insisting the caterpillar sounded sadder when he read it, I found myself watching them from the kitchen doorway with an ache in my throat. Not a hurt ache, a healing one. The kind that comes when you realize your child is learning that love can sound calm. By the time Ren turned 4, she had started calling him my Marcus in that possessive little kid way that was both funny and devastatingly sweet. He laughed every time and said he was honored. I didn't correct her. Why would I? He had earned his place, not with grand gestures, with consistency, with presence, with the kind of care my father had always acted like he'd provide someday if the timing was better. Life was not perfect, but it was steady. Our Saturdays had rituals, pancakes in the morning, library trips, sometimes the children's museum, if I picked up an extra shift and could afford it. On Sundays, we went to Herman Park, and Ren ran until her cheeks turned pink, while Marcus and I sat on a bench with coffee and talked about nothing urgent. It was the first time in my adult life that family felt less like a source of injury and more like something I was allowed to build intentionally, and that, of course, was when my father came back. It was a Friday afternoon in October. The air had finally cooled a little. I was home early because Ren had a mild cold and was curled on the couch under a blanket watching cartoons while Marcus chopped strawberries in the kitchen. Someone knocked on the door. Not texted, not called. Knocked. I opened it and there he was. My father looked older than his 57 years. Smaller somehow. His hair had gone whiter than I remembered. The confidence he used to wear like a pressed shirt had slipped off him. For one second I honestly wondered if I was imagining him. Then he said, "Natalie." And just like that, every old wound in my body knew his voice. I stepped outside and pulled the door nearly shut behind me. "What are you doing here?" He cleared his throat. "I wanted to talk." "About what?" He looked past my shoulder toward the apartment as if he could see the life inside it. "About Ren. About us. About how much I missed." That word almost made me laugh. Missed. Like he had been stuck in traffic. Like my daughter's first 4 years were a family barbecue he arrived late to. I folded my arms and waited. He finally said it. "Cassidy moved to Los Angeles in the spring. She doesn't call much. She's busy with her own life. And I've had a lot of time to think." There it was. Not remorse. Not revelation, consequence. The daughter he had built his whole emotional world around had done exactly what selfish people do when they no longer need you. She left. And now he was standing on my doorstep trying to reach for the backup life he had once treated like optional. My stomach went cold. From inside the apartment, Ren laughed at something on TV. Marcus said something low and warm from the kitchen. My father heard those voices too. His face shifted. I realized then that he had not come prepared for the fact that our life had gone on without him. Not just survived, flourished. And that was when I knew I was not going to make this easy for him. He started with the word please, which would have moved me once. Please, Natalie. I just want a chance to know my granddaughter. I looked at him for a long moment and wondered whether he had any idea how ridiculous that sentence sounded coming from the man who had chosen a pool party over her birth. Then I asked the only question that felt honest. Which grandchild? He blinked. I took one step forward and lowered my voice because I didn't want Ren hearing any of this through the door. Which grandchild are you talking about? The one you skipped when she was born because your other daughter wanted cocktails and floaties. The one you saw once in the NICU for 22 minutes and never really came back for. The one whose first birthday you forgot. The one whose mother you left bleeding and alone in a hospital bed because a party mattered more. His face tightened. Natalie, I know I made mistakes. Mistakes. That word lit a fire in me so fast I almost smiled. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. A mistake is buying whole milk when someone asked for skim. What you did was a choice. More than once. Over and over again. He opened his mouth, but I kept going because for years I had swallowed words to keep the peace. And peace had never once protected me. You don't get to show up now and act like you lost something by accident. You gave it away. You stood by a pool with a drink in your hand while I was trying to understand whether my daughter was going to live. Then you let years pass. You didn't fight for us. You didn't apologize. You didn't even notice when I stopped calling. He rubbed a hand over his face. I thought you needed space. I laughed then, a sharp, ugly sound I didn't recognize as my own. Space. Is that what you call forgetting your granddaughter existed unless it was convenient to mention her? He looked down. It was the first sign I had ever seen that shame might be reaching him, but I did not let it soften me. Shame that arrives only after loneliness is not growth. Sometimes it is just self-pity in a different outfit. He tried again. I was wrong. I can see that now. I want to make it right. Before I could answer, the door behind me opened a crack, and Ren's small voice floated out. Mommy, you okay? I turned immediately. Yeah, baby. Go sit with Marcus. I'll be right there. She peered around the door at my father. Her eyes, so much like mine, held no recognition, no warmth, no history, just polite confusion. Who's that? My father's entire body changed when he saw her. I watched the exact second the fantasy in his head collided with reality. He had probably imagined a child running into his arms because blood would do the work for him. Instead, there was a 4-year-old girl in fox pajamas looking at him like a delivery man. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I answered for him. Nobody important yet, baby. Go on? She nodded and disappeared back inside. The door clicked shut. My father looked like I had slapped him. Good, I thought. Now you understand at least 1 inch of this, he whispered. She doesn't know me. No, I said. She doesn't. Then I let the silence sit there until it became unbearable, because some truths deserve room. He asked if there was anything he could do. That was rich. There are no catch-up milestones, I said. You don't get to go back and hold her when she was tiny. You don't get to hear her first words. You don't get to know what it cost me to keep us afloat, because you never cared enough to ask when it mattered. He swallowed hard. I care now. I leaned closer. That is exactly the problem. You care now because Cassidy moved away. You care now because the house got quiet. You care now because the daughter you chose over me stopped picking up the phone, and suddenly you remembered you had another one. He flinched. I had never seen him flinch before. Not when my mother died. Not when Derek left. Not when I told him Ren was in the NICU. But that sentence landed. For a moment I thought he might get angry. That was his usual move when cornered. But instead he looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. I deserve that, he said softly. Yes, I said. You do. He looked toward the parking lot, then back at me. I've been alone a lot this year. I know that may sound selfish to say. It does, I told him. He nodded. I deserve that too. Then, to my surprise, he said, I kept waiting for you to call. I thought eventually you'd cool down. You always used to. I stared at him. There it was. The core of it. He had built his entire treatment of me on one assumption, that I would absorb it, that I would bend, that no matter how often I was sidelined, I would come back and make the relationship easy again. This was not just favoritism, it was entitlement. I said, you built a whole life around the idea that I would keep forgiving what you never even admitted doing. He didn't deny it. The front door opened again, but this time Marcus stepped out and stood just inside the frame. He didn't posture, didn't interfere. He just stood there in a quiet t-shirt with strawberry juice on one hand from cutting fruit for my child. And something about that image hit my father like another blow. This man, whoever he was to us, looked more like family in 30 seconds than my father had in 4 years. Marcus asked, You need anything? I said, I'm okay. My father looked at him and then at me. Is that her father? The nerve of that question almost knocked me sideways. No, I said, he's a man who knows how to show up. My father closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, they were wet. I had never seen him cry in my life. Not at my mother's funeral, not at anything. He said, I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just want one chance to do better. I could have slammed the door. I could have told him to never come back. Part of me wanted to. But another part of me understood something important. Real revenge is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is making someone stand in the doorway of the life they could have had and telling them they are not entitled to enter it. So I said, if you want any chance of being in Ren's life, this will happen on my terms, not because you want it, not because you feel bad, and definitely not because you're lonely. He nodded too fast, like a desperate man grabbing at rope. I held up a hand. Don't agree before you hear it. You will go to therapy. Consistently. Not once. Not until you feel better. Long enough to understand what you did and why. You will not tell Ren you love her until she is comfortable with you. You do not get to dump emotion into a child because you feel guilty. You will not buy her affection with gifts. You will show up when I say, how I say, and if you disrespect my boundaries once, we are done. He listened like every sentence cost him. Good, I thought again. It should. Then I said the thing that finally made the whole encounter worth it. You're not asking me for a second chance to be a grandfather. You never got the first chance because you walked away from it. What you are asking for now is the chance to audition for a role you already failed. He stood there speechless. For the first time in my life, my father had no clever defense, no paternal authority, no golden child to hide behind. Just the truth. Marcus stepped back, and Ren called for him from inside, asking where the strawberries were. He answered her gently, I'm coming, kiddo. My father heard that too. He heard another man being needed inside a home that should have once included him. I let him carry that. Then I said, I'll text you if I decide there's a next step. Do not come back uninvited. And I closed the door. Not hard, not theatrical, just firmly enough that he could feel exactly what it meant. On the other side of that door stood the consequence of every choice he had made. On this side stood the life I had built without him. I leaned against the wall and let out a breath I felt I had been holding for 4 years. Marcus looked at me and asked, "You okay?" I said, "Better than okay," because I was. For once, I had not begged to be chosen. I had been the one holding the line. 3 days later, after I had enough distance to think clearly and not just from anger, I sent my father a message. It was not emotional. It was not cruel. It was precise. I told him that if he truly wanted a path toward knowing Ren, it would begin with responsibility, not access. I wrote that he needed to start therapy and stay in it. I wrote that I expected a written apology, not one full of vague regret, but one that named what he had done. I wrote that Ren did not owe him recognition, affection, or the title of grandfather simply because he shared blood with her. And I wrote that if he ever tried to guilt me, pressure me, or turn other relatives against me, contact would end immediately. He replied 2 hours later with only one sentence. I understand. I didn't trust it at first. People like my father are often sorry for consequences long before they are sorry for harm. But 2 weeks later, he sent proof of a therapy appointment I had not asked to see. A month after that, he mailed me a letter. I sat at the kitchen table after Ren was asleep and read every line slowly. He wrote that he had spent years mistaking "Natalie will handle it" for "Natalie does not need me." He wrote that after my mother died, he poured all his attention into Cassidy because she was loud about wanting it, while I had always been the child who survived silence. He admitted that he had rewarded my strength by neglecting me. He admitted that on the day Ren was born, he did not choose the party because it mattered more. He chose it because it was easier. Easier than facing my fear. Easier than showing up for pain. Easier than being the father I deserved. I cried when I got to that part. Not because it fixed anything. It didn't. But because it was the first honest thing he had ever given me. I did not rush. That was important. Women are trained to confuse empathy with obligation. I was done doing that. For 3 months, I kept all contact between him and us indirect. He called once a week at the exact time I allowed. He asked how Ren was doing without trying to claim closeness he hadn't earned. He remembered details. Her favorite color had changed from yellow to green. She was learning letter sounds. She hated peas and loved dinosaurs. Slowly, reluctantly, I began to believe that therapy was not just a performance for him. Cassidy, on the other hand, remained exactly who she had always been. When she finally called me, it was not to ask what Ren needed or how I had survived those years. It was to say, "Dad's miserable. Aren't you being a little harsh?" I laughed because some people really do think boundaries are cruelty when they stop benefiting from your lack of them. I told her, "I'm not making his life hard. I'm just refusing to make his choices easy anymore." She said, "He made one bad call. One." I let the silence stretch before I answered. "No. He made the same call for years. He just finally ran out of chances to hide it." She hung up on me. We have not spoken since. By the time spring came around, I agreed to let my father meet Ren in a public place for 30 minutes. A park, neutral ground, no surprises, no gifts. He showed up early and empty-handed, which I noted. Ren held my hand the whole walk from the car to the bench where he stood waiting. He looked more nervous than I had ever seen him. "This is Ren," I said. She looked up at him and said, "Hi." He crouched a little to be closer to her height and said, "Hi, Ren. I'm happy to meet you. Not, 'I'm your grandpa.' Not, 'Come here and hug me.' Just happy to meet you." Good, I thought. He's learning. The visit was awkward. Of course it was. Ren talked mostly to me and Marcus, who came because there was no universe in which I would put my child in an emotionally loaded situation without the people she trusted most nearby. My father asked her what books she liked. She answered in single words. He didn't push. When the 30 minutes ended, she waved politely and asked if we could go get ice cream. In the car, she said, "Your friend is shy." I had to turn my face toward the window so she wouldn't see me smile. Over time, more visits happened. Not many. Not fast. He kept showing up. That mattered. The first time he missed one because of traffic. He called ahead instead of assuming I'd understand. Growth can look very unglamorous. Sometimes it looks like a man learning that other people's time matters as much as his own. On Ren's 5th birthday, I invited him to a small party at our apartment. Not because he had earned full redemption. I don't believe in magic erasers for betrayal. I invited him because he had done enough work to stand quietly at the edge of her joy without trying to own it. He arrived with a book about birds because he remembered she loved the park. She accepted it, said thank you, and ran off to show Marcus the wrapping paper because it had foxes on it. My father stood there holding the empty ribbon in his hand while another man got called from across the room, and I watched him absorb that reality. He did not complain. He did not sulk. He helped refill juice boxes. He picked up fallen napkins. He stayed until the end and then asked if there was anything he could clean. After everyone left and Ren was asleep, he stood in my kitchen and said quietly, "You did what I never did. You built a safe home. You protected her. You protected yourself." I looked at him for a long time and then nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Sometimes that is the only honest bridge available. Here is the part I want anyone listening to this story to hold on to. Family is not proven by titles. It is proven by presence, by who shows up when things are hard, not when the pictures are cute. A child remembers who made her feel safe long before she understands biology. And women especially need to hear this. Setting boundaries is not bitterness. It is not pettiness. It is not revenge in some ugly small sense. It is how you stop pain from becoming inheritance. I could have let my father walk back in because he was lonely. I could have let guilt rewrite history for both of us. I could have handed him Ren and pretended time had healed what accountability never touched. But children pay for the comfort of adults who refuse the truth. I was not willing to let my daughter learn that love means accepting crumbs from people who abandon you when they had the chance to choose better. If you are listening to me right now and you have ever stood in a hospital room feeling smaller than your pain because the people who should have come did not, I need you to know this. Their absence was not proof that you were unworthy. It was proof that they failed a moment they should have honored. Do not build your self-worth around someone else's emotional limitations. Do not teach your children that access to them is automatic. Love is a privilege. Trust is earned. And being related to a child may introduce you to her life, but only consistent care gives you a place in it. My father still sees Ren sometimes. Cassidy is still mostly a stranger. Marcus is still the person Ren runs to first when she wants help opening a juice pouch or finding her shoes. None of that is accidental. It is the natural result of who stayed and who did not. And if my father carries regret now, he should. Regret is the rent we pay for the love we treated as optional until it was no longer ours to count on. I raised my daughter alone for years after he left us at that hospital for a pool party. He came back begging later. But by then, I was no longer asking anyone to choose me. I had already chosen myself, and more importantly, I had chosen her. And that made all the difference.